My name is Tamika Sims, and I am the Director of Food Technology Communications at the International Food Information Council Foundation, or IFIC. So our first panel is going to come to the stage, moderated by Jessie Price, explores what the future holds for consumers. How will shopping, cooking, and dining change? Our experts will attempt to paint this consumer experience for us. Please welcome, and they're going to walk to the stage here, Dr. Mario Ferruzzi, Professor of Food Science and Nutrition at North Carolina State's Plants for Human Health Institute, Katherine Alford, author, Maisie Ganzler, Chief Strategy and Brand Officer of Bon Appetit Management Company, Chris Bissig, Director of Industrial Design for GE.
Okay. Thank you, Tamika. Thank you. And thanks for the water, ladies. All right, so the consumer experience panel, shopping, cooking, and restaurants. So as Tamika said, yeah, we're going to be talking about how the consumer experience is going to be changing. What can consumers expect in the future? But as I was getting ready for this panel and for this day in particular, I kept sort of bumping up against that word food system. It's something we're going to be talking about today, and yet being the editor of a consumer magazine, it also happens to be a word that I try and avoid using in the magazine because it's kind of wonky and it's just, it's kind of nerdy. It's sort of talking about, that interconnection of growers, food formulators, researchers, policymakers, nutritionists, flavor experts, artisanal food makers. A lot of them are here in the room today, and it is sort of the purpose of today. But what are all those different pieces of the food system this thing working towards? They're working towards helping feed the eaters, right? The consumers. But as I mentioned earlier, those consumers have a whole lot of power, over $600 billion worth at the grocery store alone. That's not to mention how much they're spending at restaurants. And so as consumers shift, that means everyone else shifts too, in accord with them. So it's a dynamic. In some cases, companies are leading consumers. In other cases, consumers are pushing right back up. So I want this panel not just to talk about what can consumers expect, but really what can we all expect the change to be that they are driving. So we need a clicker. I'm going to let each of these panelists introduce themselves because they are all best prepared to talk about what their expertise is. So you are up first, Chris.
All right, great. Thank you very much. My name is Chris Bissig, and I'm an industrial designer at GE Appliances. At GE, we are way into kitchens, and I lead a team of designers working on next-generation appliances for those kitchens. As we think about kitchens, we offer a range of appliances to fit many different decors. So if you've got an ultra-modern kitchen and want sleek, minimal styling, we offer appliances to fit. If you have a traditional kitchen and want kind of more traditional stainless steel kind of pro appliances, we have styles to fit those kitchens too. So we want our appliances to look great in kitchens. Go on to the next slide. But we know, we want them to look great, but they also have to function great too. So our design team spends a lot of time thinking about new features, new configurations, new ways of interacting with information in the kitchen. And one of our most recent innovations has been around the cooking process itself. So if you think about cooking in the past, it's really been about setting a temperature, setting an element, and setting a time. Think like Bake 350. And our team has been working on some new tech that varies when the elements turn on and off in sequence and staged cooking so you can get great food outcomes. So this illustration in the center kind of shows a precision cooking algorithm for whole chicken. So you can imagine by applying those heat elements at just the right time, you can increase, make it brown at the right time. You can keep it juicy and flavorful for users. And those are just a few of the ideas that we're working on for the future. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Great. Maisie?
Hi. I'm with Bon Appetit Management Company. We are a food service company serving 3 primary markets: higher ed, only private colleges and universities; corporate, locations, usually headquarters, often a lot of tech, and specialty venues, which are mainly museums and 2 ballparks, home of the San Francisco Giants and the new home of the Golden State Warriors. And we serve about 250 million meals a year at over 1,000 cafes in 34 states. And I'm dealing with a very interesting consumer base of people that are highly educated or getting highly educated, and there is some assumption that they have a certain amount of money, or that they will have a certain amount of money. Certainly on college campuses, the issue of food insecurity has gotten a lot of attention recently. So they may not have a lot of money now, but the hope is that they will become big consumers later. And so we see trends really starting from having people when they're about 17, 18 years old through their careers. And so it's an interesting place to sit in the food system and to serve this population.
Okay. Katherine?
Well, I'm a consumer, first off, as we all are in this room. I've had a really long and varied career in food. I've been a chef in very high-end restaurants. I've taught in culinary schools for both professional and avocational. I'm a writer, a traveler. I've worked in health environments, teaching people with health risks like diabetes. I'm an author, and mostly I've spent the last 20 years at Food Network and ran the test kitchen and developed the Food Network Kitchen brand. Did 4 books with Meredith while I was there, and worked also on product lines with Kohl's, so cookware, equipment, etc. I am no longer at Food Network. I am an author, and I have a book coming out in February called Rage Baking, which includes women's voices, activism, and sugar. So I'm the thing.
A little bit of everything.
Yes.
All right, Mario.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm Mario Ferruzzi, so I'm a faculty member at North Carolina State University in the Plants for Human Health Institute. And my area of expertise, I'm a food scientist and nutrition scientist kind of combined into one. So I work at that interface and study a lot of what beyond nutrients in plants actually help elicit the human health benefits that are associated with plant foods. In doing so, a lot of the areas we work on relate to the food matrix itself. So if you think about it, the structure chemically and physically of food and how it affects delivery of micronutrients and plant phytonutrients. And get the opportunity to work extensively with the food industry as well as with other funding agencies on projects related literally from the farm and the breeding of new plant products all the way through the processing of them industrially, and then thinking about what happens as we as consumers eat them, how these compounds elicit their benefits. So that.
Okay, perfect. All right, so obviously very varied backgrounds, so we'll have a lot of different approaches for the conversation. So I want to start out diving into the area of convenience, because I think so much is driven by this need for convenience today, with ever increasingly more hectic lives and demands on our time. Often for families, getting dinner on the table is stressful. It's hard to do. And at the same time, I think many families aspire to that home-cooked meal, right? We all want to have that and feel like we're being good providers, and we're not just getting takeout or throwing something that's pre-made at our family. So how do you see that gap between the aspiration to cook dinner and the demand for convenience being bridged? So any of you, I'd open it up to any of you to start with that.
Well, I'll start with it. That is the holy grail of convenience, health, and deliciousness and affordability. I mean, I kind of feel like it's this unicorn that we're all trying to achieve. And there's a lot of pressure on that, and I think the consumer experiences that pressure as performance. So you have the media story and what's out there, and then in the family environment when you're children, that's even more pressure, right? Like you can do everything right and you put it in front of your kid and they're like, I don't like this. And believe me, I grew up with an incredibly picky eater. And everyone said to me, oh, your kid must, and it's like, nope, it's pasta and butter every night. So, I think consumers have a lot of challenges, and a lot of times they just want to kick out. My point of view is to, as you said about the food system, is to get people and consumers not as end users, opening a package, but as actively engaged in it. And so getting back to the thing that you said, which is creating experiences through food. So when we were developing whole food recipe content for weeknight meals, we would take into consideration what is the shopping experience. I mean, that stops people often right there. Like, they hate waiting in line. What are they going to do? Or they can't get it. So now we have many opportunities, whether is it a delivery service or whatever. There are more options to solve problems along the way. But I think from my point of view, in the test kitchen, when we were creating weeknight meals, first off, people wanted nutrition. So that becomes like, okay, that's a straitjacket you have to be in. They want to know all the numbers, so how do we satisfy whatever the perception is of the moment? It's more protein, less carbs, whatever. So that's always a shifting thing. But then also, time. Time is the biggest, it's the thing people want back all the time. So I was talking to my son last night who doesn't like to cook. And I said, so what is the thing? Why is it that you don't like to cook? He's like, and this is a quote, I get mad if I spent more time cooking than I do eating.
Oh.
That's what it is right there. And I was like, well, that really is it. And he's like, I'll spend 20 minutes eating. I won't want to spend any more time than that.
Yeah.
So you're like, okay, damn. So I would love to spend 3 hours cooking it. I don't care that it takes 20 minutes. So that consumer is very different. And then, what is the experience of it? So when we were creating recipe content in the test kitchen, I knew that if we solved, the time, the nutrition, all of it, a lot of these things, then the recipe tester would say, it was fun. Then I knew we had, and it was also delicious, and it would take a good photograph.
Yeah.
And
Got to document it.
And it has to be documented. And the photograph, just to say, is no longer just about being in the media, because the currency that people have now of, I cooked it, I took a picture of it, and I shared it, that's also the win.
Yes.
Right? It's like there's a performance element. So, our job as people who are providing to consumers is to create that seamless, frictionless experience. Like, we have to be the Uber of food, so that it feels like they have a wonderful experience. It's very hard, and you're constantly jiggering and problem solving, because really the easiest thing is like boil some pasta, slice a tomato, and wash a head of lettuce. Done. So from my point of view, when I started seeing innovations in produce, where it's it's zoodled or it's cut or do anything that cuts that down, that solves some problems. There are trade-offs with that. I see innovation in the freezer section, whole grains, which take 40 minutes. Now you can, zip them into the microwave. They become building blocks that the consumer can work with, because they do want this experience. It's like the old Duncan Hines. They had formulated it without doing anything, just add water and doing it. And they realized the consumer wanted to do something.
Right.
So they made it so you had to add an egg.
Yes.
So that engagement, you are it's very important. When I had young cooks working for me, I would say, we're not creating recipes, we're not creating food, we're creating an experience for people. And it starts in the store.
Yeah.
And it ends with the cleanup. And we would count bowls.
Yeah, so you mentioned a bunch of innovations in terms of the products that, have become available in terms of produce. Chris, I want to turn it to you for a second. Are there innovations that you see that are making cooking easier, dumbing it down in a way so people can feel like they're cooking, but it's simplified?
Yeah, absolutely. We're finding that a lot of users want to save time to make time with family and friends. As you think about innovations in cooking, we're looking at a lot of technologies like our Vanium oven that actually eliminates preheat, so you can get that dinner out to the table 15 minutes faster. We're thinking about a range of cool ideas that make it easier and faster for users. We do a lot of ethnography, and we go into people's homes and kind of observe how they're making dinner. One of the things we've seen is a lot of people unloading the dishwasher and actually using a towel to dry dishes. Takes a few minutes. It's not a big deal, but I think a lot of these little things, these little bits of time that we can save will make a difference overall.
Yeah.
So in the dishwasher example, a lot of our engineers have figured out some ways to actually use a drying system so that the dishes are completely dry when you unload that dishwasher. saves a little bit of time. And I think we're going to see a lot more little things like that from a technology standpoint that are going to help people save time in the kitchen.
Yeah. So Mario, I want to throw a question over to you. I want to ask you about convenience foods and what we can expect to see, what categories are poised to take off, and what food companies are tapping into consumer demand for convenience.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think we've heard already, the produce side is certainly one that has really exploded over the last decade, and I think underlooked a lot of times, but certainly not by consumers now, is the frozen section. When you think about 20 years ago, what you saw, just for example, frozen pizza aisle, you know, it was a few things wrapped in plastic and with the cardboard backing, and that was it. And the explosion of what you see in terms of quality of these products now is tremendous. And when we think about convenience, it's always kind of top of mind for the consumer products companies, because we understand that that's one of those trends that has not really changed. It's always something that consumers, as they evolve, get busier, are always going to be looking for something that is convenient. What's perhaps changed is the sacrifice on quality. So to make something more convenient is not just serving it, putting it in a wrapper, and making it so they can open it up and eat it. The quality of what's there is certainly ramping up day by day. And I think the focus on attention to ingredients, better ingredients, whole ingredients, and of course processes that preserve freshness in that convenience section is key. So I think the frozen aisle has been one that's important from a number of areas in terms of fruits and vegetables, but also prepared meals. I think you're also seeing, for example, changes occurring in the produce section, which are bringing fruits and vegetables in ways that are typically seen in other parts of the grocery store, whether it's fresh juicing, whether it's ready-to-eat products, whether it's completely prepared meals that are there that you used to not see. Right. I think we'll continue to see more of that. I think for a lot of it, you know, we've seen reductions in other parts of those sections. The frozen, you know, the juice concentrate side has certainly kind of disappeared.
Yes.
For those that have ever gone hunting for that now in the grocery store, as certain sections disappear, new ones come up. So yeah. I definitely see more in those areas coming.
I do love the tube of limeade juice concentrate for a simple margarita mix.
If you could find it, yes.
Yeah, please, go ahead, Maisie.
Thanks. So I just wanted to build on something that Mario said about that we've always had these convenience issues, and I think that we sometimes, right now, act as if this is a new problem that people have never had these to feed their families before, right? When we saw women enter the marketplace as in the workforce, we saw the rise of the TV dinner, and as you said, it was sacrificing of quality for convenience. 15 years ago, it was the dream dinners trend. You remember that? You're going to go have a glass of wine with your lady friends while you assembled meals that you then took home and cooked. Now it's the meal kits, but what I think is different right now is that these businesses are being subsidized by a huge amount of VC funding. And there's not a fundamental business model that's yet to work. And you look at the Blue Apron IPO. And so I think we're going to see a correction from a business standpoint that doesn't have anything to do with the need. There has always been a need for convenience. We have yet to figure out how to do that without sacrificing the quality in a way that's profitable. I think that's going to be the next wave. Yeah,
I think that's an important one. Maisie, I also wanted to bring up during this part snacking and how snacking is changing, right? People are eating snacks on the go more and more, and I'm wondering how that impacts food service and your particular business.
I think people are wanting to graze throughout the day versus eating 3 distinct meals. And snacking for many has become no longer the mindless escape. So no longer the, I'm going to sit at my desk with a big thing of chips and just eat constantly, right? It's more about functional foods, a lot of the things that we heard Ali speak about, those ingredients, highly tailored for me, right? Because I am either paleo or gluten-free or looking for whatever nutrient. So very tailored. But our biggest issue right now in snacking is packaging. More and more of our corporate customers have what we call micro kitchens. They're the the snack shops that everything's free and you can go and get as much of whatever you want as possible. And they're concerned about the overeating of that, what is as much as you want as possible, even of the better for you ingredients, but the packaging, everything's individually wrapped. And so how do you deliver that personalized snack experience of the tailored for me energy bar without it being individually wrapped? And nobody should ever touch my food because we're all hyper concerned about germs.
So what's the solution? What's the answer?
I don't have it yet.
You're working on sourcing that.
We are working on sourcing that.
Okay. All right, so I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the kitchen and cooking and technology. So according to a recent survey of Meredith consumers, 93% of women say that smart home technology is transforming the way we live. So let's start by getting into those changes and what we're likely to see in the near future. And I wanted to, of course, talk to you first, Chris, and bring up something that it's sort of like the big thing that gets all the buzz, the smart refrigerator, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's, oh, it's smart refrigerator, it's gonna be here, it's gonna be so great, it's gonna solve all your problems. But really, it's not really out there yet. The penetration of this appliance is only 5% right now. So talk to us a little bit about what it does now and where that technology is going.
Yeah, I think a lot of our refrigerators today are actually pretty smart. We've even got a model that will make coffee for you in the morning, for example.
Nice.
And our engineers spend a lot of time working on software algorithms to optimize efficiency for energy consumption. There's a lot of excitement in smart appliances and connected appliances in particular. And like our refrigerators today, we have millions of connectable refrigerators out there. And they can send you push notifications if someone forgets and leaves the door open, or if the refrigeration compartment starts to warm up. And that's kind of a big deal because in testing, we've heard that people want to make sure their food is safe. So I know there's a lot of excitement in smart appliances, and it feels like much of the excitement is around cooking. If you think about cooking, it's kind of the active place of the kitchen. It's where a lot of the different media forms come together. So we've developed a cooking hub, a kitchen hub, that goes above the range. And we feel like that area is kind of interesting because as media comes in and you ask for recipes digitally and you want step-by-step cooking guides, that place around the range is really interesting.
Okay, interesting. All right, so according to a Meredith survey, online cooks, Gen Z and millennials use smartphones for every part of the cooking journey. So I'm interested in how all of you think smartphones are going to be integrated in new ways into the consumer experience with food.
You start.
Maisie,
Okay, I'll
yeah.
take it. I'm not focused on the cooking journey because we're doing the cooking for people.
Right.
But certainly we see that people want all of the information possible on their smartphone, and what they really, really don't want to do is have a human interaction to ask a question. And that, as a hospitality company, has been a really hard pill for us to swallow because we want to talk to you and we want to exchange information, and people want to just be like this, right? And not have to self-identify. And when we talk about allergens, and I use the term allergens broadly, I know we have a lot of RDs in the room because I know what we're really talking about is intolerances, but people are presenting them as allergens, are going to die if they have this, right? Cilantro. I myself don't like it. I will not die if I have it. And there are people that have serious allergies. I don't mean to make light of that. But we would like you to have a conversation with a chef, because we're cooking from scratch right there, and to talk about it. But people don't want to have to self-identify, so they want all the information on their smartphone. They want it to be instantaneous, and they want it to be correct. And our food system is not yet built for us to have instantaneous information about ingredients and supply chains on our smartphones. But that's very
I personally don't like the experience when I'm at LaGuardia Airport and I can only order on the little, iPad at my seat. I hate it. I don't want that. I would like to sit at a bar and, order a drink and talk to a human being. Do you find people reacting negatively or the opposite way against that sort of, I'm only going to interact with my food order through my phone?
I haven't seen the pushback from the human element loss, which I would love to see. I
Yeah.
would love to think that our employees are so engaging that people miss them, you know? And we do get compliments on employees plenty of times, but the pushback we get on technology-enabled ordering is that I can't do what I want to do with it, that
Okay.
I want to know all the ingredients, I want to be able to modify all of the ingredients, and there's huge operational difficulties with that, and so the technology is not where people want it to be. We get that pushback.
They want it even more personalized.
They want it totally personalized, and they should be able to do that all from their phone very quickly. And I could go into a very uninteresting explanation of why it's really hard to say, like, no cilantro in your burrito, like, on a smartphone.
Okay, Katherine, I have a question for you. I want to hear you talk about how access to ingredients is changing home cooking, and that idea of aspirational food that you and I talked about.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I was at the network years ago, they would say, consumers would say, well, I can't do that. I can't get that ingredient. Or in food magazines, we've heard that. It's like, make sure it's all accessible. And that's always a constant when you're creating content. Just on the book that I was working on right now, I have a co-author, and they live in Maine, and we are like developing recipes back and forth. And I'm in New York, and I'm getting something, and she's like, "Oh, I can't get that, but don't worry, I'll get it at Amazon tomorrow." So that that friction to ingredients is definitely changing. Supermarkets are way more diverse. They have many, 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 many more opportunities for consumers to get what once used to be called, gourmet ingredients. I hate that word. It really depends on where you're standing of what your accessibility is. I mean, I'll tell a story. Yesterday, I live on the Upper West Side. There's a old New York classic big grocery store, and then on one corner, and there's an H Mart on the other corner. And H Mart is a big Asian grocery store, and it has convenience that is associated with that cuisine. All the meat is like sliced for hot pot or stir fry. Oh, yeah. You won't see anything like that in the store across the way. I was in there last night. There was a woman who was buying live crabs and just picking them up out of the bin, and she was completely comfortable. She was an Asian woman. There was another woman in the store who looked a lot like me, and she couldn't figure out where the barbecue chicken was because it was being called fried chicken. I mean, so she was completely disoriented in her shopping experience, where conversely, maybe that consumer who went into the other market would be just as disoriented. So the choices we have are completely changing, and we're going to where the consumer is. And I think that it's changing what's considered out of reach, and that it's more coming closer to the consumer experience, and particularly, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about diversity, but as who owns the dominant culture of what American food is, that is completely shifting. And it's much more reflective of our diverse culinary traditions and flavors and choices, so it's much easier in some ways, but also it creates a wonderful chaos, which is kind of great if you're a cook and you feel confident. If you're starting out as a millennial, there's that panic. And one of the things that I keep hearing is like millennials, and as a parent of a certain generation, we've created an expectation of they won't fail. Don't make me feel bad. I want to succeed. I have to be great at this immediately. And so this journey of life stage around food is very different now, and so we're going right to the consumer and giving them what they want to succeed, which has good parts and bad parts to it.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
I think so. I think so.
Kind of
There was a
went
lot
different
in there.
ways.
There was a lot in there.
But we have more access to more things in more ways, and there's not one size fits all.
And people are cooking more different kinds of cuisine, which I think is, for someone who loves to eat, a good thing. Okay, I want to talk, while we're still in this section, about the Instant Pot. And this is something that is just, sort of started percolating and then just took off and went so crazy. So, Chris, maybe you have something to say about this. What do you think is driving this craze about the Instant Pot? Where's it going? And any idea what's the next Instant Pot? Because I want to do a cookbook on it.
I'm not sure, but it feels like the Instant Pot is just perfect for something that's fast but gives you great food outcomes, great tasting food. And I don't know where it's going to go, but I think it's going to be a lot more tools like that in people's kitchens down the road.
But isn't it just a pressure cooker?
Yeah, with steam, yeah. And I think it's what's more convenient too, because I think a lot of consumers feel it's a lot safer than the old pressure cookers.
Yeah. Well,
So they're
we
comfortable with the
definitely had a
technology.
few burnt cooks in our test kitchen doing Instant Pot recipes. So, but we didn't have anything exploded, so that's good. Okay, so let's move on. I want to talk a little bit more about flavor and new tastes and people trying cuisines that they're less familiar with. So I want for all of you to do a lightning round, 1-minute answers about Millennials and Gen Z. Research shows they're far more adventurous and informed about food than previous generations. They're shopping at more grocery stores, know more about what goes into their food, and are actually willing to spend more on it. So what do you think are the key ways that these generations are going to change the landscape in the next 10 to 20 years? Mario.
Wow, that's a lot to cover in a lightning round. Well, I mean, informed is important to put in the context because where they're getting information is also important. So they're absolutely informed and they're very powerful in the information that they use and apply. Those of us in the science field would say, well, yes and no, depends on where you're getting your information, going back to the smartphone. But what it's done is it's fragmented our approaches from the standpoint of developing products or providing products for these individuals in terms of deep focus on, for example, one core brand or product or SKU to fragmenting into multiple products all the time and being flexible and changing your approach to what these trends are. Trends that were coming along once every 3 or 4 years and now coming along every 3 or 4 months. Mm-hmm. So I think, yeah, absolutely we're more willing from the standpoint of the food industry to address those things because, as you said, we probably have opportunities to look at new and novel ingredient streams that we never thought about before because the consumers are finding them before we are as product developers. And then they're guiding us in terms of what to develop.
So it's ever faster innovation.
But it challenges the supply chain because it could be very quick that one partner or one player in the game goes in and really secures that ingredient stream, and then you're scrambling to try to find something. So it presents a lot of challenges from R&D.
Interesting.
And then also in the commercial end.
Okay, Katherine.
I think the expectations are just way higher and that food has become both a source of connection and social currency in a way that it always has, but now is much more profound. As you know, a meal is trying to solve a lot of different things, whether it's global warming, political social justice, deliciousness, being a good parent, et cetera. So the pressure is on, and the consumer is demanding a lot more from the experience. Okay. And I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah. Maisie?
I see amongst the Gen Z and millennials a fair number that are using food, eating, cooking as their leisure time activity and spending an entire weekend trying to figure out what to do with all the pieces of a pig that they bought from a local farm. And I haven't seen that population have to yet deal with having families and having to balance more things. So I think that's going to be interesting in the next 20 years to see how those people who could be incredibly self-indulgent now deal with having to do more things not for themselves.
And do they keep doing those big weekend cooking projects when they do have a little more time?
Yeah, and they all start
or do they get worn down?
When the baby's born, then I'm going to cook everything for my child that it ever eats from only the local organic something or other. And at some point, convenience kicks in.
Yes.
But where is that point? I don't know yet.
Okay. And Chris?
Yeah, I think for millennials and Gen Z, the smartphone, it's just they're native to it. They're digital natives, and they've got to have it. So we've got to serve them with that. And if you think about the smart home, where people are connecting light bulbs and heating and air systems and appliances, the smartphone is really the glue that kind of holds and connects all those pieces together. It's almost become a remote control for their life.
Yes. Okay. Good. I like that. Very varied answers. Okay, so this is total change here. I want to talk about fermented foods, sort of a specific topic. So Mario, I wanted to ask you about that because to me it seems like one of the things that is just sort of swept up in terms of sort of like a flavor or sort of a theme for food is fermentation and probiotics being added to absolutely everything. So what's going on here with fermented foods, and how's that affecting your work?
Well, I mean, the trend is really, what I would say, has exploded for multiple reasons, one of which is, of course, there's the notion of health associated with fermented products and fermented foods, but then also the notion of it as being an alternative process by which they can preserve those foods, which is where it all started thousands and thousands of years ago. And then, so from the standpoint of being more sustainable in some way, but then the aspect of health with the probiotic piece and the explosion in the area of research around the gut microbiota. And those interconnections. So that is ingrained there. Where is it going? You're starting to see now more of the probiotic piece stretching out into shelf stable is really the goal. It was always kind of the holy grail to have a liquid shelf stable probiotic product. That's certainly the area where I think we might see some progress, but where it's going beyond the bacteria is what we're thinking about, and think of this as a new term, the postbiotic, right? So this is a term that you're starting to hear now, which is really related more to the actions of those bacteria and the metabolites that they generate through the fermentation process. So whether this is lactic acid, that's one of them, but then think about all the fermentation that occurs with the substrates, the complex carbohydrates, but also what I work with, for example, the plant phytochemicals. So we look at those fermentation products as being key to the biological effects and the health benefits of these products, but also to what we already knew as consumers for thousands of years, the flavor, the texture, and other aspects of those products. So I think where we're going in that realm is we're finally starting to piece together pro, and now postbiotics as the ultimate outcome. And so everybody has to have a biotics, or everybody has to have a omics or something else. So I guess postbiotics is the latest one I just heard at a probiotics conference I was at.
Heard here, postbiotics, guys. Okay, so both Maisie and Katherine, both of you guys talked sort of two sides of the same coin. So Maisie, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about your sort of how Bon Appetit Management Company thinks about your different consumer types and how you service those in terms of different types of food and also sort of different formats.
So we don't differentiate the lines of business, so we don't think of the college students as different from the corporate employees because in age they are so similar now. But what we have seen a growing trend is people identifying their total identity with their food choices. So somebody will very rarely say, I follow a vegan diet. They say, I am vegan. I am paleo. It is who I am. And so when we started to do things like healthy is defined by who. And so we've got to break things down to allow people to make their own choices based on how they identify their diet to be, and to be careful about the balance of education versus preaching, and getting people's hackles up by attacking what their true belief system is. And food has become so integral to our belief system. So when we get back to your question about the populations, we're looking more at types of diet versus age or ethnography. We're looking more at self-identification in diet.
And what about the one group you talked about, which was the last holdouts of people who still want a sensual experience from food?
Yeah. So there are people that want to put their phones down and to actually experience their food. It's one of the few things that we do that touches all five senses anymore. And so there's kind of a ping-ponging in cafe design about wanting your entire cafe to be tech-enabled, to have great Wi-Fi, to have plugs everywhere, and wanting your cafe to have no plugs and no way for people to stay connected to technology so that they can break away and have a sensual experience with their food and have a human interaction with who they're dining with. And there's a lot of interest on both corporate and college campuses to force people to speak to each other. For various reasons.
So sad.
And see that food can be that thing, that bridge there.
That they sit down and actually talk. Okay, so I'm going to tee one up for you, Katherine. What is American food today, and where's it going?
I thought about that a lot since we were talking. I mean, there's a couple things that come up. Yes, we're going to love our burgers and pizza and, you know, all the barbecue and all of those traditional foods. One thing I will say when I thought about that is that a lot of American food is handheld. I mean, that's a very essential part of the things that, whether it's pizza, tacos, burgers, sandwiches, think about it, it's in your hand, so it's moving and mobile. But also we're sushi and kombucha and kimchi and all of these other things, so it's a much broader. I do think that we really are at a place where we can say it is a true melting pot, and that, you know, if you look at what is probably in all of your refrigerators, think about what's in there. They're probably products that you didn't grow up with, or you thought were hard to get, but that are now being incorporated in your diets. So I do think that there's a tremendous amount more diversity. The one thing I would say, you know, and I could go on about this for a long time, is that the shift is away from a Eurocentric point of view to more Latin America and Asia. So we're going to see, you know, there was a taco editor added to Texas Monthly
Nice.
this week. So does that tell you where we are?
To complement their barbecue
Exactly.
editor, thank you.
And I think that this is both a combination of bigger, bolder foods, inexpensive foods, culinary adventure, but also just culinary identity as well. I mean, it used to be if you came to America, you gave up your culinary traditions, and that was seen as other, and now I don't think that that's true at all, and we're really at a wonderful tipping point of who gets to tell the story of American food. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
And we're going to eat better for it.
Yes, we are. Hallelujah. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes left. I want to talk about sustainability. Surprise! Sustainability is, you know, key to what we talk about, and 91% of Meredith women say that they always or sometimes read food labels, and that is tied into this trend towards transparency. So I want to ask each of you to do a little level setting with us and talk about what is transparency. What the heck does it mean, you know, in your line of work anyway? So Mario, I have a feeling you have something to say about this one.
Well, I mean, from the standpoint of the food label, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to interpret, right? So we've already heard a little bit about today where things can be labeled one way but are actually coming another. And you know, smartphone technology and information at our fingertips can help to a point, but again, I go back to saying it depends on where you get that information from. So I do believe that as we simplify our foods, going through this process of reformulating products and going into products with 6 or fewer ingredients on the label, you have to replace all of that functionality that you took out. I mean, we heard Ali talk about that earlier. Mm-hmm. And to do that, food manufacturers are looking more and more for multifunctional ingredients, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually better. Mm-hmm. It could be more complex, it could be losing something, it could be bringing other carriers along that are more crude ingredients, et cetera, that the consumer sees as a simple one label thing, but is actually bringing around a lot of other complexity. Right. I don't want to use the term risk, just complexity.
Right.
So transparency, while the consumer thinks fewer things on the label may be better, it depends on what we define by each of those statements on the label, and
what is actually
and
better.
where is it coming from, and how is it being sourced, and how is it being manufactured. And there are stories that certain manufacturers tell there, and then there are some that don't. And so you have both sides of that equation, and some of that information is just not attainable with a smartphone.
Yeah. Katherine?
Well, I'm going to talk about things that don't have a package. So that's fruits and vegetables. So, I mean, the farmer's market experience, I think of that transparency of standing there and, as you said, the food system, you know, shortening that circle of, I think, to consumers look at going to at a farmer's market as both entertainment and also an affirmation of how they're spending their food dollars, and standing there and talking to the farmer and asking them, you know, where does it come from, and being engaged in a larger food system. So I think that sort of transparency for, I think a lot of the EatingWell consumer is a way that they can do that and be more engaged in their food systems. And I think that's very important, and the growth of farmers markets, shortening the supply chain and being more integrated into it, I think is one way consumers can be more assured. Are there still problems within it? I mean, is a farmer going to tell you he may or may, or she or may tell you the truth or not? So there is always a little bit of trust in that. So, but I think it's way better.
Yes. Maisie?
For us, transparency is really key. We cook from scratch and we want people to understand as much as possible about the food that they're eating. And we found that when you provide the information in a passive way, people often don't have time to go to it. I did a focus group once with students and I said, what if there was a place on the web that told you about all the farms we buy from and this, and they were all like, that'd be awesome. And I think, well, it exists. It's been up for 2 years. Like, have you been there? You know? And so we've had to create experiences to create the transparency people are even demanding. They're asking for it, but they don't have the time to actually go and do the research. So I have a team of what's called fellows. They are student activists on their college campuses that we served, that when they graduate work for me for 1 year to 2 years, and they travel the country doing education around food systems issues and taking people on farm tours, taking them even on kitchen tours to show them the back of the house and say, here's where the food comes from, open up the refrigerator, walk in, look in, see what's here, what's not here, and then going to the farm. And that's been our greatest tool in transparency. We've got dashboards that can tell you where all the chicken came from and all of that stuff too, but I think the more effective romance has been by creating experiences around the transparency.
The storytelling behind it.
Absolutely.
To some degree. Chris?
Well, and that storytelling also applies to the design work we do in terms of styling appliances. As people look at styles for their kitchen, they want to hear the background, where the design come from, how's it going to fit into their decor. And we found that by being more open in that process, we can actually gather feedback from users and refine that design so that when we do launch it, it's more appropriate to their kitchen.
Okay. So Mario, I want to circle back around to you and ask you if you can give us an example of a time with a product where a manufacturer, a food company was trying to make their label more clean or transparent, and it actually added complexity, and how that worked.
So, I mean, there are several, but I mean, thinking of some of the bar products that you have out there, when we think about bringing materials in a bar together, you have to think of a binder. Mm-hmm. And many times that's a carbohydrate-based binder, sugar, right? Mm-hmm. Well, you'll look at a combination of either a tapioca syrup or a corn syrup or something, and then you have to have some crystalline sugar in that product. And one of the reasons that you need sucrose or a crystalline sugar is to make it solid and to actually keep it so it doesn't, let's say, absorb or move moisture around to a certain extent, so it doesn't get sticky. Mm-hmm. So as you say, okay, I have to remove sucrose and I want to keep my product intact, and you start removing out some of the main components that actually provide the functionality, what happens is you get really sticky products that fall apart. And there's a lot of those out there on the market because they're reduced down to, I only want, intact nuts, intact raisins, and honey. And that's it. And it's not so easy. The technical challenges there are problematic. And so part of the challenge there is you're also dealing with this proliferation of interest in these products, but the science base behind developing it is sometimes being disconnected from the demands that are put on the product developers from the marketing side. So, in other words, we're being told you have to develop products a certain way and find a technical solution or move on to a different product. And so there are challenges there. It doesn't mean that they're bad. Doesn't mean that we can't overcome them, but it does alter the qualities of the products perhaps, and could also alter the consumer perception of those products.
But does the label end up better looking?
Yeah, there's less ingredients, but the product falls apart. So.
Okay. All right. Well, that may go back to answering the question from earlier about the taste of those products. Okay, so I wanted to talk about ethically raised and sourced foods. Maisie, I know you have a deep and long background in terms of the work you've done for sourcing ingredients and really thinking about how they were grown or how they were picked and how it's that impacting the people working on it and the environment. So what's what are you working on now? What's coming next?
We're working on now, continuing working on food waste for sure. We've just released a study on plate waste. There's been a lot of focus on food waste in the supply chain and in kitchens, but we think that the majority of waste in our operations is after someone's taken the food and whether they eat it or not. So we've just, in partnership with the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, released a plate waste study, and some interesting results. Some things that I thought were going to be big factors in plate waste weren't. Self-service versus served actually doesn't matter from a plate waste perspective. Some things that are obvious, like all you care to eat, there's more waste than in a retail situation. But college students waste twice as much food as corporate employees, even in the same service format. So we think of colleges as being all you care to eat. We don't think of corporations that way, but with the proliferation of free food programs, there are a lot of corporations that look like colleges. And even in the same service format, college students waste twice as much as corporate employees, yet studies show college students are more concerned about waste than corporate employees.
Well, why? What's happening?
I can't tell you that. The study shows, it measures the waste. It has not gone to measuring the behavior, the why.
So that's next.
Right, the next why we're going to do, I think we knew anecdotally, but we really saw a lot of in the study, is people taking to-go containers and then eating in the cafe with them, not taking the food to go. So they have a choice between China and plastic or compostable or whatever, and they take the disposable, the single-use disposable, and then they go and sit in the cafe and then throw it away. So we are embarking on a study as to the why of that, because that seems really asinine.
Yes, it does.
Right? From every perspective. So we're kicking that off in the next month. We found that tasting spoons at every station reduce food waste significantly. We often have tasting spoons at soup and let you taste a soup, but not at every station. So
How do you prevent double dipping?
you give somebody a spoon and you
Watch them.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got to have eagle eyes there.
Yeah. So food waste, I've got a new person on my team, been on my team for 15 years, but in a new position called Manager of Plant Forward Innovation, specifically to look at all of the product development on the plant forward side, as well as the culinary techniques. This is a person sitting at the crossroads of culinary and purchasing, but there is such rapid innovation on this that we can't deal with the number of products that are coming out. I had to assign a complete person to it, and that is really, for us and for many of these companies, stemming from a sustainability desire to decrease the taxing on our planet from meat proteins.
Interesting. Okay. So a little sort of related to sustainability, but in a different way, talking about human impact and worker impact. Katherine, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about how our choices are impacting chefs and food workers.
Yeah, I think it's our expectations of cheap food. And every chef that I talk to is that basically there's a labor crisis, that there isn't the skilled worker, that we want to have a living wage, but the food system is broken in terms of labor, and it's how to up that up. And that conversation is long overdue, but it does have effect, and I'm sure you see it in your business. Chefs can't find people to work in restaurants. I mean, there just isn't. The culinary schools are suffering because they realize that not everyone's going to end up on television, and it's hard, and it's going to change. I think from the innovation point of view, whether it's robotics or different formats for how you're eliminating the waiter, you're doing self-serve. All of these things are really at their core about the human element in it, and I think it's interesting that it is a conversation that's happening. For example, an eater, the young guns, they all had to sign a commitment to have a fair and good work environment. That was never part of the conversation. It's long overdue, but it's going to change the way we get food. all along the food chain, from the farm, the restaurant, the supermarket. Who is the person behind your food?
Yeah, I was going to say that's a parallel issue going on the farm. I mean, the fruits, vegetables, and the high-intensity crops where we need manual labor, it's becoming very, very difficult to do. Automation will eventually solve some of that.
But not all of it.
But not all of it, right.
Yeah, I mean, automation doesn't taste.
And technology, right.
I mean, it does, but.
But ultimately, you're dealing with a gap in people that are going to be able to deliver the products, and the cost goes up, and the quality suffers, et cetera. So these are challenges all along the stream.
And when you look at automation in the fields right now, it creates a huge amount of food waste. Almost, in some cases, 40% more. Because the machines aren't as good as people are at differentiating.
And you're talking about like produce picking machines.
Produce picking machines,
Okay.
yeah. I was talking to a green onion farmer, a big scale green onion farmer, and he said he has a 40% less yield on harvest when he uses the machine, but it is still worth it to him to use the machine. And he's harvesting in Mexico, so it's not just a U.S. problem on
No,
labor.
it's across.
It's a global
It's a global
problem.
So some of that's being targeted by breeders to develop varieties that are more aligned with automation as opposed to using current types of automation. So just to give you, if you're dealing with artichokes that grow tall versus short, broccoli that's taller, you're leaving more of a stem in the ground. So yeah, I think, we have strategies to get there, but it takes time. And in the meantime, we have problems.
All right, so we have just a couple minutes left, and I did want to talk a little more about food waste. Chris, how is GE making it easier to not lose food in your refrigerator? Because I know that I think people have it in there, and it kind of just gets lost. You don't see it after a while. And I mean, that's a food waste that we all see in our homes every day. So are you guys working on that?
For sure. I think as a designer, one of our visions, our dreams has always been where you open the refrigerator doors and all of your food just appears floating in a sea of light. And we're getting there. So as you think about the inside of a refrigerator, all the little structural elements that kind of protect your food, that create those shelves, those little compartments. We try to make all those as transparent as possible so that you can see inside and not lose things. But lighting's a big piece of that. And with LED lighting today, we can put lights where we want to actually highlight particular food items. And a lot of times what we're doing now in our latest models is we're actually using sheets of light in the back of the refrigerator. And that bounces light around the interior. So it lights even those bottom bins, the top bins, everything is lighted evenly, so it's much easier to find food. A lot of times we're offering these bottom freezers or multi-door units with drawers as well. What's nice about those is those drawers actually slide out to the user, so you can kind of look and see all your food and it's presented to you in a nice way, so it's much easier to find what you're looking for.
Yeah, I want one of those pull-out produce drawers. Yeah. Those are pretty fabulous. Mario, do you see any food product formulations changing to address food waste? I mean, when I was thinking about it, it didn't seem like something that you would necessarily see coming along, but.
So, a couple different things that are happening there is you're starting to utilize a lot more of the plant secondary streams in ingredient manufacturing. So whether it's natural colors, whether it's natural extracts for flavors, et cetera, you're starting to see what used to be composted now turning into, let's say, value for the processor. This is something we learned 30, 40 years ago in the dairy stream, dealing with the whey protein issues. You have a different whey protein challenge now, but yeah, so you're seeing opportunities to repurpose what were traditional whey streams. Now we joke about cheese factories now actually being whey protein factories where cheese is the byproduct, right? So because of the price of whey protein, right? So you're really seeing opportunities where those are being used to reduce waste, but more importantly to create revenue for the processor or revenue for the farm. That's one. Efficiencies in manufacturing, I agree with Ali, there are opportunities in certain areas where we can certainly look carefully to try to increase them. Depending on the industry you're in, anything more than a 3 to 5% loss of product, you're going to go out of business because the margins are so tight. Mm-hmm. So there is a big focus on reducing it at the level of the factory, also because there are aspects of cleanability, aspects of how you have to manage a factory for safety that you don't want a lot of excess waste product that can't be reworked in. So I think there is always going to be a continued push to become ever more efficient and balanced, not so much just with the food waste, but with the energy and the water.
Yeah.
In my days of working for Nestle, I remember the first thing they used to do is secure a water supply for, let's say, a beverage plant or a coffee plant, and they would recycle every drop, right? So it became one of the most efficient operations you'd ever see. So I think that will continue to go with the big players. The question is, as we fragment into a lot of small players that are relying on co-manufacturers to do a lot of that for us in the industry, and they're changing constantly what they're making, then they become inherently less efficient. So
Right.
the question is, how will we achieve similar efficiencies that some of the large players do in some of these more fragmented type of operations?
Right. Maybe they'll get bought up by the big guys
Maybe.
as is happening. Okay, so that brings us to our Q&A. Does anyone out there have any questions for the panelists?
They're all hungry.
Hi. So you mentioned earlier that I think it was 90% or upwards in the 90s of Meredith readers are reading the nutrition label and are interested in sustainability. But I'm curious if you guys have a perspective on the number of consumers who are actually making purchasing decisions based on sustainability and like environmental sustainability specifically.
I don't off the top of my head have a number on that, but that's probably something we've looked at and we can get back to you about.
Okay. Or even just like changing perceptions, because I feel like it's not, I think it's a very small percentage of consumers. So even if it's just qualitative or anecdotes from your readers in terms of people who are actually purchasing and what types of consumers those are.
Well, I think there's a lot of different segments, in terms of our readers. Absolutely, some are just, in it because they want delicious food, and, they'll pick up, maybe look at the label, but they're not really sure what they're supposed to look at on the label. And when they're asked a survey, they will say, yeah, I'm a label reader, but, they're probably not that careful of a reader, and they're probably not, sort of skewing their decisions that way. It's probably more what's convenient and what's going to be delicious and relatively healthy that I can feel good about. But there is certainly, another segment that is more interested in the nutrition and or more focused on sourcing. And I am constantly surprised and impressed by our consumers at how much they know and how informed they are. And the letters that I get from them sort of expounding on all sorts of different topics are really amazing and really just go to show that, it's consumers know a lot about food today, a lot more than they ever have before. We have over 8 million readers of the magazine, so it's a big spectrum. I always think of it as a curve, of a learning curve.
Hi, my name is Daphne Dorsey, and I'm a communications manager with the Crop Science Division of Bayer. And so I know that this topic didn't come up during the panel, but my question is, when you're speaking about the future of food, how do you address food experiences for consumers who live in food deserts where access to healthy foods may be limited, and in many instances, if there's a grocery store chain, selections may differ from one area of a community to another to make sure that everyone has a really great experience as far as access?
Do any of you want to take that on?
Yeah, I mean, I could start. I think that's an extremely important point. I love that you brought it up because it opens up the conversation for the role of what we would say is a diverse food supply that can deliver on what we would say are the basics of dietary guidance. So just in the fruit and vegetable space alone, we have a hard time in terms of thinking of delivering fresh at price points that are competitive. And we can argue in these food deserts, and we could argue the reasons behind that, but it does open up the opportunity for us to think about products that are processed or products that are manufactured in a way that are preserving the nutrition, bringing in those qualities into those areas. I always think of, I'm someone who's worked with juice companies and look at 100% juice as one of those vehicles that brings fruit nutrients to consumers. I'm still not sure all the time when we squeeze a product and express juice versus eat the whole product, what the fine differences might be beyond a little bit of fiber here or there, but the problem is the price point and the preservation of those nutrients is real. And so when you get into access, is it better to have that, or is it better to have, you know, a sugar-sweetened beverage in those food deserts, which is available there and allowable by cost, versus something like 100% juice product? So I think you have, it just highlights the role that we can use processed products for in delivering of nutrition, but it also highlights the importance of making sure we make those products with the same kind of nutrition and thought process in mind, and it's not just a formulated product that's adding a lot of sugar and calories and everything else.
Right.
Hi, thank you. This is Joe Clayton from IFIC. Just in response to the earlier question about sustainability as a criteria for purchasing, we do a survey every year called the Food and Health Survey, and if you go to foodinsight.org, you'll find all of the survey data from most of those years. And taste, price, healthfulness, convenience continue to outweigh sustainability as a criteria, but you can see how sustainability has begun to kind of creep up as a factor. It's a huge minority, obviously, that's focused on that. But last year's survey, Tamika, I think last year, 50% of the people that we surveyed had some degree of desire to see sustainability, mostly environmental, I think, in their product. But more than 50% had no idea how to find out whether that was a sustainably produced product.
Hi, my name is Miguel Freitas. I'm here with Danone North America. I had a question about consumer experiences at restaurants. You didn't really talk much about it, but specifically in terms of the nutrition composition of foods there are given for people to eat, in terms of their quality, but also in terms of their quality. Some healthier fast food restaurants indicate the calorie content of their offerings, right? But most restaurants still don't. I am looking for that. So do you have any idea when this will come in the future, when we have all this information available, when we go and have a pasta with cream or without cream that could change considerably the nutrient content of the food, especially given, you know, the crisis with food-related diseases in this country?
So you're really asking about when restaurants are going to be a little bit more sophisticated
Yes.
about providing nutrition
Yeah.
information to consumers. Maybe that's something, Maisie, you can talk about.
Yeah, so for fast food restaurants, you should be seeing the labeling everywhere, not just at places that are healthy. Any restaurant chain with 20 or more locations serving any item 50 times or more a year should have calorie information on the menu board, the same size and font and color as the price, and then all of the information available someplace else. So any chain restaurant should have all that information for you. When you get into the mom and pop restaurants, the places that I personally like to eat a lot more, some will have information, most don't. I would highly caution you about the accuracy of that information, though. If you delve into how those numbers are derived, they're often based on a USDA database of information. And so you can look up what macaroni and cheese is, and I can tell you that macaroni and cheese is, I don't know, 500 calories per half cup. And I can put that on my menu. But what macaroni and cheese recipe was the USDA using when they wrote macaroni and cheese, right? And Katherine can make you macaroni and cheese at any level of calorie. Well, not any level. No, we've learned there's no...
Just air. Just air and water. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I would suggest that you make it a dual question of when will the information be provided in a way that is actually trustworthy and that you can make actionable.
Well, I mean, having the resources, I mean, the story behind that is the resources to actually do a lab analysis of all of the recipes on your menu is ridiculous. I mean, we deal with the USDA database every single day at EatingWell. It is a flawed tool. So our analyses are not perfect, but we don't just put in mac and cheese. We actually put in ingredients. So hopefully they're a little bit better than that. But nevertheless, for a single restaurant to either have the expertise to use that tool, that nutrition analysis tool, or to pay a lab to do the analysis is prohibitive.
And there was an estimate when the law came out of how long it would take you to do it. The government has to estimate how much work, and it was like minutes for what literally takes hours.
Yeah.
So we're a long way from having great information for changing menus.
All right.
Hi, my name is Bonnie Tabdix, and I could tell you that I wrote an entire book on food labels and food shopping, and as a registered dietitian, I was so confused with how to explain what's on the label, let alone be a consumer that could have very little education and pick up a package and that we're expecting them to read it. But what I also find, this is both in my practice and when people write into me, is that even though consumers are seeming like they want to know more about transparency and they're expressing everything that they want, I could tell you that when someone goes to a farmer's market, that they think that local means organic. And that a lot of these terms are getting mushed together when really they may not have very much to do with each other at all. So I think that when you were talking, Maisie, about the farmer's market experience, I think that it really is a lot more about experience because it's really what we want. If you want local and you're talking to a farmer and you love what he sells and what he says, then even though it's not organic, you may really want to buy it. Even though it's costing you more money than the local supermarket would have cost you, it's because you want that experience. So I find that to be very interesting. And I guess for Jessie, do you have a lot of comments from your consumers that really where they're contradicting each other about the same kind of thing?
Well, I think the points about, everyone has their particular way of eating and their particular focus. Both Maisie and Katherine talked about that, and I think that's particularly true, for our readers or any food magazine's readers. And our goal is always just to help them make the choices that are right for them. Yes, we try and provide information, but we're not going to preach to them and tell them what to do. Everyone's sort of in their own sort of mindset, I think. Okay, we are out of time. Well, wait, you want one more question?
I'll try to make it quick.
Okay, very quickly. One last question.
It was thematic. We keep talking about labels, but don't we think that it might be nice to not eat food with labels? Like, if you just eat vegetables, like, who cares how many calories are in your green pepper? So, I guess my point is that focusing on labels seems kind of reductive and simple, and if we're talking about the bigger picture, understanding our food, I think we should try to get away from labels.
All right.
I guess, what do you guys think? To make it a question, I'm sorry.
You make an excellent point. I think Ali mentioned the access to food, right, and the cost of that. And if we could all go and go to our local farmers market and afford to do that, you're absolutely right.
And have the time.
The issue is that we also have a broad swath of the population that we need to have access to more affordable food. So there are roles in both cases.
About how we just need to pay people more money.
That's a different argument, and I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm just saying there is an issue of also feeding the population, and I also think about it from the standpoint of a lot of the work that I do in developing countries is they have a very different view of, for example, processed foods than we have. From the perspective of looking at populations of people that are looking not only as food as nourishment, but food as a way for economic development. That is a completely different world that they live in than we do. But what you're saying is absolutely right. It'd be great if we could all go source all of our own ingredients and have the time to do that and have the money to do that. I agree with you. That would be a great situation for us to achieve.
And I'm going to just disagree because I agree with you. I'm just going to sort of say that unfortunately in the food conversation, doing that has become a luxury and is perceived as a luxury and it's really, it's not. It never was a luxury to cook from real ingredients till we're in a different relationship with our food. And that also, one thing we've talked a lot about is the, marketing and the image and what we're trying to sell and the economy around it, that, it doesn't always have to be, it can be very simple. And we have created an expectation that our food should be, more than what it is. And I agree with you that like just having a simple meal of, an orange is kind of awesome when it's a good orange, and it doesn't have to be a bar or anything like that. But we've really gotten away from just having that relationship with food. And you don't have to go to a farmer's market to eat whole foods. You can source them in different ways. I mean, supermarkets, the most exciting thing, and we talked about, is the produce section is now revitalized, and you see this I travel a lot around the country and make sure I go into supermarkets, and without a doubt, there are food deserts. But the fact that we're having conversations about how to make a food system that is a shorter loop to getting fresh whole foods in our communities, I think is really important. And that it's really boring, but eat your vegetables.
Which we still
All right.
don't do.
That's the perfect note to end on right there.